It's a new year, and you know what they say, new year, new me, even though I'm using the same crappy microphone. And one thing about that is I found an application that cancels the noise and cancels the echoing, but I tried it and I feel like there's too much clipping. I don't know if it's better than this or not. I already recorded this whole thing, now I'm doing it again, so that's kind of unfortunate. Because I'm using these Apple EarPods, I think they're called, and the left side is broken. I desperately need a new microphone and headset. Anyway, I've been using Linux for almost a year. I've tried to go back to Windows a few times in the beginning, but I've stayed. And I've had some problems. This is mostly my experience with Linux, but it's also been a good year for Linux in general. I'll go over how I found out about Linux and why I decided to start using it over Windows. So I used to use Windows 11, and I was really excited when Windows 11 came out, and I installed it as early as it would let me. It's safe to say I was disappointed after I installed it because it was the same thing as Windows 10, but with rounded corners. So I've been interested in operating systems for a while, but I still didn't know what Linux was. I can't completely remember how I found out about Linux. I think it was on YouTube in a performance comparison, probably in Minecraft. I just remember seeing Pop! OS and thought it looked so cool, just because of how different it was from what I was used to seeing, which is Windows or occasionally a Mac. I found out about different distros and how they all looked a little different and had their own kind of community surrounding them. I thought it was really cool. And then I heard Ubuntu was good for beginners. In 2023, I installed it onto my laptop, and I was scared I would delete the drives on my desktop computer. But eventually, I decided to put it on my desktop computer because I thought it was kind of cool on the laptop. I didn't last that long because I didn't understand or take the time to learn how to use it. So I didn't really understand the file system, why there was no C drive or anything. GNOME was really different. It wasn't what I was used to. So I ended up switching back to Windows 11. Still in 2023, sometime later, I found Linus Tech Tips Linux Challenge video, and I saw that he used Manjaro, and I wanted to try it. I would say that I liked it better, but I think it was just because of the desktop environment, which was KDE, and it was more familiar to me. I was just blindly using the AUR even though I had no idea what that was, just copy and paste commands from the website. I didn't know how to use Linux still. I just knew some things about it, like the cool app stores and how the distros look different. I'm pretty sure I bricked that Manjaro install somehow, and then I just went back to Windows because I couldn't be bothered. In late 2023 or early 2024, I found out about Linux Mint and how it was easy for Windows users to switch over. And Linux Mint has been my best experience with Linux so far. It was similar to Windows, and most of the things I wanted just worked. And this is where I learned quite a bit about how Linux had actually worked. I started understanding the package managers and knowing what a Flatpak was. I got used to the terminal and understanding what the commands did. I found some desktop effects and I thought the wobbly windows were so hilarious. And it was a good experience. Then one time I was using Windows and there was an update. I restarted and then my Linux Mint partition was gone. That could have been my fault somehow, but I was a little sad that it was gone and just moved on using Windows. Then I realized I didn't want to use Windows anymore. So I could have just installed Linux Mint again, but then I remembered how I liked KDE on Manjaro, so I decided to go with Kubuntu. This time I installed it on a separate drive from Windows. Kubuntu is just Ubuntu but with KDE instead of GNOME, and this is the distro I've been using to this day. I've been using it for almost a year. I installed the 22 LTS release version, and then like a week later, 24 LTS came out. So bad timing, but I switched to it anyway because I hadn't really done much with the first one. Of course, I wanted to install the NVIDIA graphics drivers for my RTX 4060. I decided to use the Scary Hacker terminal to install them. I just followed some commands a website told me to enter, and it worked. But I would have problems with it later. Then to finish the setup, I started installing some of the apps that I used. One of the first things I did was remove the Snap version of Firefox and get the one from Mozilla's apt repository. Because I just heard snaps were bad, but they didn't end up being much of a problem for me. I even use them sometimes. I just didn't want to use it with Firefox. I had problems with like dragging and dropping files into Firefox, so yeah, I just didn't want to deal with it. And then I installed the Flatpak version of Steam and installed all my games. But that was a mistake because Flatpak sandboxes the install, and then Steam sandboxes the Proton games. So whenever I was trying to pick like a file for a game or something, it was really difficult to find what I was looking for. So I just got the APT version, and then I reinstalled all my games again, which was like a ton of gigabytes and took forever. I got some more things set up like Minecraft, Godot, GIMP, and Blender. Everything I used on Windows worked well here or had good alternatives. I still miss Paint.net, Visual Studio, and some game modding tools. I could use Wine for some Windows apps. In my experience, it isn't great on more complex apps. Anyway, I was having a great time with getting all the apps I wanted to use. It was really easy. I just looked it up in Discover and clicked install. No hunting through websites finding executables. Next, I wanted to play some games, of course. Steam is the place to play games on Linux. Almost every game on there is compatible thanks to Wine and Proton, and almost every game that exists is on Steam. Of course, I had some issues. Anti-cheat games didn't work like Fortnite or Rainbow Six Siege, so I had to switch to Windows to play those games with my friends. And VR is possible on Linux, and I think it's getting better as time passes. It's just not good enough right now, so I have to switch to Windows if I want to play VR. And I play Counter-Strike 2 a lot, and it has native Linux support, but at the beginning it wasn't a perfect experience. Because Counter-Strike 2 was pretty new, and they weren't focused on the Linux version. It had a way worse performance than on Windows. Like, it was bad. Every time you'd spawn in, it stuttered and lagged for a good minute or two before it was playable. So I switched to Windows to play Counter-Strike for a while. Today I can play it perfectly fine on Linux. While not as performant as Windows, it works well enough that I can even play competitive. And one of my other games is Minecraft. It's a Java game and it runs the same as Windows or better. And the rest of my random Steam collection works perfectly. Sometimes I use development tools, not for a job or anything, just for fun. And most of the time it's making my own game or modding another. Almost every development tool works perfectly on Linux. I use Godot for making my own games, IntelliJ for modding Minecraft, VS Code for getting mad at CSS, and I do miss Visual Studio since it was a good IDE for free, but I never actually used it that often, so it's not that big of a deal. Also, compiling things on Linux is so easy. You just follow the commands the developers set and put them in the terminal, and you'll be done pretty soon, depending on the project size. On Windows, you have to install something else, usually Linux in a VM or WSL. So even on Windows, you have to use Linux to compile most things. I haven't been posting to this channel for very long, but I should go over how I make and edit my videos all on Linux. A lot of creators struggle to use Linux for content creation just because most creative software isn't available, mainly Adobe. But I have something those creators don't. I can't afford anything Adobe makes, so I don't have to worry if it's compatible or not. Editing software is an important part of the process, and the few creators that use Linux mostly use DaVinci Resolve for editing, and I would use it, but H.264 and AAC codecs are incompatible on the free version, and that is a deal breaker. You can do it in the studio version, but again, I'm not going to pay for that yet. I could use other formats, but they're just too big of file sizes. I don't have the storage for that, so I'm going to have to rule out DaVinci Resolve. A lot of the open source video editors aren't great, but I found one that I think stands out from the rest. It's Olive. It's a great open source video editor, and the reason I picked it is it's because one of the fastest ones I could find. It's a bit lacking in terms of effects, but it has anything I would ever use right now anyway. And the only issue is that it's still in development, so it crashes from time to time. But usually you can recover it, so it's not that big of a deal. And the development process itself isn't the fastest. It does what I need it to do, so I'll keep using it. To edit something, you need footage first. My videos for now are just screen recordings. Like most people, I use OBS, and it works perfectly for me. I would say it works just as well as it does on Windows, even if it's missing the game capture source. For photo editing, I just use GIMP. I mean, my thumbnails aren't that complex, usually just a white glow and blue handwritten text, so it works well enough even if I like Paint.net better. Something I like about Linux is the customizability. even if it doesn't look like I've customized anything. I just like how modular it all is. I can make more panels and move things around however I want. I can even just switch out my entire desktop environment if I want to. The desktop add-ons and plugins are really cool too. I said earlier, the wobbly windows are just so funny. You don't even have to use a typical desktop. There's something called window managers, and I haven't messed with them yet, so I can't really talk, but maybe that's a future video? There's a lot of cool configurations and customizations, but there might be a bit of a price for it. X11 is a windowing system that's used on Linux to display windows. It's quite old and it has its issues. Luckily, Wayland is a much newer windowing system and will most likely replace X11 in the future. Now that future isn't far off, it's nearly here and a lot of distros are switching to it, but the LTS version of Kubuntu I'm using, Wayland hasn't been the most functional thing. For me, it just shows a black screen until I hard reset my PC. If I just upgrade Kubuntu, it'll have Plasma 6 with better Wayland support. Anyways, X11 has caused some issues with multiple monitors as well. My primary monitor is on the right, and I have it set as that. But for some reason, it opens almost every app on the left. And on those monitors, the main one I have is 240 Hz, and the one on the left is 60 Hz. If I turn on the 60 Hz monitor, then the 240 Hz monitor turns into 60 Hz. So most of the time, I just used one monitor. These problems are caused by X11 and should be fixed with Wayland. I also had some problems with my NVIDIA drivers. I have a G-Sync monitor, but turning it on made a weird blur effect in games. Also had to boot into safe mode to reinstall my NVIDIA drivers twice. Might have been my fault though. All my hardware worked really well with Linux. I didn't have to install any drivers besides NVIDIA. I did want to control my keyboard and mouse RGB though, because everybody knows RGB makes you better at gaming. Of course, none of the official software supports Linux, which I kind of see as a good thing because it's all just extra bloat to take more RAM running in the background. But there's a program called OpenRGB that works with all your RGB controls, except for my mouse because it's kind of special. For the case of my mouse, I can run a Windows VM and pass through the USB and control it from there. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. It's been a great operating system that can do everything I need it to do. Plus, it doesn't spy on me. I can just use my computer without even thinking about using Linux. It's just normal. I can play games with my friends just fine without even having to say anything about using Linux. Until there's a game with anti-cheat and I have to restart my computer. I know I'm a little late making this since it's meant to be like a New Year thing. Better late than never, I suppose. I'll keep using Linux in the future, but would I recommend it to you? I say yes, but it depends on what you need from a computer. If you're new, I would recommend Linux Mint because it makes things easy and has the least annoying features, and I do think Linux is worth the cons. You can easily get away without ever needing to use the terminal. Anyway, that's my experience with Linux this year, and I hope you enjoyed listening.